When Susan Oliver played the green-skinned alien in Star Trek, she shocked everyone. But that was just the start. In the 1960s, she was one of only a few women brave enough to fly across the Atlantic Ocean by herself in a single-engine plane, going against both gravity and social norms. But behind her happy smile were problems she didn't want to talk about, secret hopes she had, and a sad finish no one could have imagined. What made this brave spirit go? What happened in her life to make things so bad? Charlotte Gerke was Susan Oliver's birth name. She was born in New York City and has always had big dreams. For her, acting wasn't just a job, it was a calling. In the play Small War on Murray Hill, she played a brave young woman from Manhattan in the 18th century. This was her first time performing on Broadway. The run wasn't very long, but it was enough to let people know she was there. However, her turn as the lead in Look Back in Anger was the part that made everyone talk. All of a sudden, everyone was talking about how charismatic and full of raw energy she was on stage. Oliver didn't like to stay in one place, so he moved on to Live TV and quickly became a familiar face on TVs all over the United States. Kaiser Aluminum Hour, the United States Steel Hour, and Matinee Theatre were some of the intense and serious shows she was in. These acts, which were filmed live, were very hard. But Oliver had no fear. She quickly made it to Hollywood thanks to the buzz from TV. She got a guest part on Climax, which is one of the few live shows made on the West Coast. She was a guest star on TV shows like Wagon Train, Father Knows Best, and Johnny Staccato because of how charming and talented she was. People were glued to the screens and Hollywood took notice. He had this restless drive when he was young. She didn't want to be just another pretty face in Hollywood. She didn't want to fit into the usual roles women had at the time. Her big break came in the form of the low-budget comedy The Green-Eyed Blonde. The movie was small, but it had a lot of debate going on. Dalton Trumbo wrote the script under a fake name because he was banned from Hollywood at the time. Oliver didn't care about the debate. She jumped at the chance to work on the project and played a fiery and rebellious woman whose passion matched her own goals. People who saw the movie, which was part of a double feature, remembered Oliver's act the most. Around the middle of 1958, she got ready for a big part in the play Patate. The show only ran for 7 performances, but Oliver's acting was so good that she won the prestigious Theatre World Award for Outstanding Breakout Performance. This award made her one of the next big stars in show business, but it also marked the end of her time on Broadway. She never went back to the stage. Instead, she focused on her growing career in movies and TV shows. It was clear that Susan Oliver was a star, and her appearance on Wagon Train in 1960 made a big splash. She left an indelible mark on the world as Maggie Hamilton. A spoiled runaway, especially in the scene where Scout Flint McCullough taught her a hard lesson. People paid attention to Oliver because she had a knack for making her characters interesting. In late that same year, she went back to Wagon Train as Kathy Eckhart, sharing the screen with John Larch and Vivi Janis this time. The episode gave us a better look at how versatile she is by showing how she can play both weak and strong characters. Susan's presence could still be felt on all the screens. In the TV show The Deputy, she played the character's separated daughter from his late girlfriend. Oliver played Susan Pittman in Zane Grey Theatre as well, dealing with revenge and moral struggle themes. She showed off her acting skills even more on Rawhide, where she played Laurie Evans and then Judy Hall in a different scene. Every part she played on Laramie or any other show was a stepping stone that helped her name in the business grow. Oliver was a well-known TV star by the early 1960s, having been in shows like Adventures in Paradise, The Twilight Zone, and Route 66. Her jobs were very different. From dark turns in The Naked City to fun times on The Andy Griffith Show, she was in shows like Dr. Kildare, Gomer Pyle, Burke's Law, I Spy, and The Fugitive, which shows she could work in a lot of different types of movies. During this time, she worked on Quinn Martin's The Invaders and was in 2 important episodes, which solidified her reputation as a reliable and captivating TV actor. Oliver played the ambitious wife of country star Hank Williams, who was played by George Hamilton, in the movie Your Cheatin' Heart. This was one of her most memorable parts. Her performance showed how a woman felt when she was torn between love and her husband's damaging ways. On the other hand, she loved the chaos of comedic movies when she starred with Jerry Lewis in The Disorderly Orderly. He also played parts in The Love-Ins and The Man from U.N.C.L.E., making sure she stays in TV shows and movies. Even with all of this success, one job stood out as being especially important. Oliver played Vina, a woman who changed into a green-skinned Orion slave girl for a dream scene in the first pilot episode of Star Trek, which was called The Cage Knot. Only in Star Trek lore, but also in pop culture, this striking picture of Vina became famous. The pilot didn't air, so the video was used in the two-part episode The Menagerie. Since then, her green skin has become one of the most recognizable looks from the show, making Oliver a constant fixture in sci-fi fans' minds. The part itself led to the making of the documentary The Green Girl, which was about her life and work. Oliver's work didn't just happen on TV. She played important parts in movies like The John Krupa, in which she played the famous jazz drummer's love interest. In Butterfield 8 and The Caretakers, she showed even more of her range by playing roles in both harsh tales and more complex, character-driven stories. By the 1970s, Oliver's face was a trademark of American TV. She played Carol Carson in The Men from Shiloh, which was a renamed version of The Virginian, in 1970. Oliver was a regular cast member on the popular soap opera Days of Our Lives from 1975 to 1976. She showed that she could keep her appeal even in a serial format with a surprise but successful turn. An Emmy nod for her part in the TV movie Amelia Earhart was the next big thing that happened to show how talented she was. Oliver brought a fiery drive to the role of pioneer pilot Netta Snook. The part showed how much she loved flying, because she was a trained pilot too. Oliver's life wasn't just a string of jobs and awards. Despite his fame, she was more than just a movie star. In the world of flight, which was mostly men, she was a fierce competitor, often going up against skilled pilots. It was rare for someone to work as both an actor and a pilot, which made her a unique figure in Hollywood. She was a woman who wasn't just famous because she liked to try new things. Someone or something that really scared Susan Oliver made her want to fly. She was on Pan Am Flight 115, a Boeing 707, going from Paris to New York in February 1959. In the middle of the trip, the plane had a frightening problem and dropped quickly from 35,000 feet to just 6,000 feet over the Atlantic. It was a cold drop, and it was the same day that Buddy Holly died in a plane crash. Oliver lived through it, but it changed him. For a year, she swore she would not fly. She couldn't fly again, not even for jobs, unless she had to, like when she had to go to Butterfield 8 to try out. Oliver finally used hypnosis to get over her crippling fear of flying. In 1964, an easy trip over Los Angeles in the evening made her feel like she wanted to try new things again. Hal Fishman, a news reporter in Los Angeles, picked Oliver up in a small Cessna 172, and she changed in a way. The thrill and view from above were enough to make her want to fly again. The next day, she signed up at Santa Monica Airport to learn how to fly. By October, she had flown by herself and earned her private pilot's license. Oliver's trip through the sky had really started. Oliver quickly fell in love with flying. In no way was it just a hobby. She spent a lot of time on it. She began keeping track of the time she spent in the air on holidays, on film sets, and on press tours. She wrote in her journal that she had been to places like Atlantic City, Mexico City, and Niagara Falls. She participated in the Reno Celebrity Air Race in 1966 and came in second place, showing that she was both skilled and brave enough to fly in a race, with a big goal in mind. Susan Oliver set out in 1967 to be the first woman to fly alone from New York to Moscow. She picked the Aero Commander 200 because it was a single-engine plane that she was familiar with, having flown for a charity event earlier that year. Oliver got ready for the task by making changes to the plane and getting extra fuel tanks, better electronics, and survival gear. She even talked to a psychic to feel better. Oliver's trip was very long. Goose Bay, Canada, was her first stop. She stayed at an Air Force base there in a room that had been used by Charles Lindbergh. Narsarsuaq was next, which was in Greenland. It was a scary takeoff at the end of a narrow bay. She made her way through dangerous conditions by spiraling upward through low clouds until she broke through to better air. When she got to Keflavik, Iceland, and then Prestwick, Scotland, she had icing on her wings of cold and a tough test of her feelings and skills. When Oliver got to Copenhagen on September 28, 1967, he was greeted like a hero. As soon as she got off the plane, reporters, photographers, and important people crowded around her. At the same time, it was both a victory and a sadness. People from Aeroflot, the Soviet plane, told her she was too late to finish the last part of her trip. Even though she had been given permission ahead of time, delays in training, bad weather, and getting the plane ready had cost her important time. She tried over and over to get Soviet officials to help her, but it never worked, and her dream of getting to Moscow was suddenly put on hold. Even so, she had done something very impressive. She was the second woman to fly from New York to Europe by herself. Oliver's job in aviation took off, even though her dream of going to Moscow didn't come true. She competed in the tough 2,760-mile Powder Puff Derby in 1970, a race across the country for female pilots. Oliver won the race by co-piloting a Piper Comanche with pilot Margaret Mead, not the philosopher. They were named Pilot of the Year by the Association of Executive Pilots. That moment made her known not only as a brave pilot but also as a fierce rival in the world of flight, which is mostly men's domain. Her accomplishments kept coming. Oliver trained to fly the Learjet for the first time as a woman in 1968, getting a type rating that let her fly the sleek, fast plane. She even used it for charters, but she never tried to set any records in the Lear. She was so determined to fly that she even tried flying kites. In 1972, her training for a glider rating was shown on an episode of The American. Both her friends and officials knew how much Susan loved flying. She joined the Federal Aviation Administration's Women Advisory Committee on Aviation in 1971 and worked to improve the role of women in aviation while there. An honors doctorate in aviation science was given to her by Embry-Riddle Aviation University in recognition of her work. The next year, she got her glider certification, which was her last qualification. Even with these honors, Oliver's job as a pilot had some problems. In 1976, the FAA gave her its last medical certificate, which meant she could no longer properly fly powered planes. But her desire to fly never changed. She was a strong supporter of flying, especially for women breaking hurdles in the field, even after she could no longer fly planes. She changed the world of flight in more ways than just crossing the Atlantic or winning races. She challenged the status quo and encouraged other women to take to the air. Oliver's book, Odyssey, A Daring Transatlantic Journey, said a lot about how bold she was. She wrote about all of her flying experiences in it, not just the technical stuff, but also how she felt and what she learned on each flight. In the late 1970s, where playing jobs were scarce, she chose to move behind the camera. She was one of 19 women chosen to be part of the American Film Institute's directing workshop for women. This was a groundbreaking program that tried to break down Hollywood's hurdles for women directors. Oliver saw this as a way to gain more artistic freedom and make long-held dreams come true. Cowboy San, the picture she made in her studio, was a strong statement. Two Japanese people play the lead parts in this classic American Western. Oliver's unique vision and desire to break genre rules are shown in this work. Even though her entry into directing was groundbreaking, there were still not many chances for women in the field. Oliver did, however, manage to direct 2 episodes of the popular TV shows MASH and its follow-up. Trapper John Maryland, the part she played in the MASH episode Hey Look Me Over, was especially noteworthy. The show, which was written by Alan Alda, moved the focus to Nurse Kelly. A woman in Oliver's direction gave it a depth that viewers liked. She had the same deft touch on Trapper John Maryland, episode called Fat Chance. Even though these were big accomplishments for a woman in a field controlled by men, Oliver had a hard time getting ahead as a director. Oliver kept working as an actress while she was also directing, though not as often. She had guest parts on TV shows like Magnum, P.I. Murder. She wrote and Simon in the middle of the 1980s. As the bias against older women in the business became more clear, her outings were short-lived. In 1988, she had her last movie role in the horror anthology series Freddy's Nightmares. At that point, Oliver had worked on more than 100 movies and TV shows, which is a huge amount of work for someone who had been working for more than 30 years. Oliver had personal problems in her last years, even though she was determined and never gave up. She was told she had colon cancer in 1989. She dealt with the disease with the fierce determination that was typical of her, choosing methods that let her keep working as much as possible. But the illness quickly spread to her lungs, which was the start of her last fight. Olive died on May 10, 1990. He was 58 years old, at the Hollywood and Movie Hospital in Woodland Hills, California. Hollywood lost one of its most interesting and talented actresses, a woman who had broken the rules in almost every part of her life. Oliver's impact was mostly hidden by her more famous parts. Like Vina, the green-skinned alien from Star Trek, even after she died. But when the 2014 documentary The Green Girl by George A. Pappy Jr. came out, it brought to light again how broad her work was and how big her goals were. Oliver had a very interesting life. The movie showed not only her acting parts, but also her accomplishments as an aviator, her problems as a director, and her fights against Hollywood's sexist rules. The video about Pappy was not just a history. It was an honor to a woman whose willingness to break rules often cost her things. It wasn't easy to make The Green Girl. Pappy found old videos, personal photos, and tapes of Oliver that had never been heard before. The movie had interviews with her co-workers, friends, and flight experts. These gave the public a look into the private life of a woman who had kept a lot of it secret. It showed how vulnerable Oliver was, how driven she was, and how frustrated she was that the acting business thought its women should be quiet and follow the rules. An important part of The Green Girl was a message Oliver sent to a friend just a few days before she died. She talked about her heart actors, her dreams, and the project she still wanted to work on. It was a raw reminder of how driven she was, and it showed that she lived an intense life, even when things were calm. Oliver had a lot of successes, but Pappy's movie also showed how hard it was for her, especially since she was a woman trying to make her way in a world that was often mean and cruel. For Oliver, his story was never just about one accomplishment, it was about working hard all his life, even when things didn't go his way. She did groundbreaking work as a pilot, director, an actor who wouldn't be lost or put in a box. Odyssey is her story. Her bold international trip showed how adventurous she was, but it was what she did on the ground and in the air that made her famous. Susan Oliver's story is one of both success and failure, of breaking rules in ways that are still important today.